LiYana Silver is a transformational coach, relationship guide, and author who helps people move through the dark night of their lives and relationships into a more luminous, self-trusting, and wholehearted way of living and loving. For over 2 decades, she's integrated training in human sexuality, somatic trauma resolution, emotional literacy, and body-based meditation to support clients, especially women, in reclaiming their bodies, desires, and inner guidance after heartbreak, divorce, or years of self-doubt. The author of Feminine Genius and the forthcoming work, Waking Up in the Dark Night of Divorce, and is known for her grounded, fiercely compassionate approach to navigate intimacy, loss, and transformation. Gosh, there's a lot there. Thank
It
you so much
really
for being
is.
kind enough to join us. I just wanted to start with and maybe it's an easy question, I'm not sure, but how do you describe who you are and what you do when you first meet someone?
Who's the someone I'm meeting? Is this someone I'm sitting
That's
next to on a
interesting.
Plane?
I was thinking that because you meet somebody around even in a coffee shop, it's different. Well, perhaps somebody that is somebody you feel a sort of kinship with, somebody you think could be a friend, but somebody you're describing who you are, what you do.
Yeah, that's right. So, because I'm not a weight loss coach or even a therapist, that's maybe a somewhat more recognizable thing.
Mhm.
So sometimes, yeah, relationship coach that works really well. Or if they're maybe more poetic and alternative in the way that they go. I might say a dark night of the soul doula, you know?
Mhm.
But honestly, I think even before I lay something down on the table, I'm kind of listening for what they really want, and what they don't, where they're stuck. Because what I do is I am able to spot the invisible cage bars, so to speak, that are keeping them where they are and from where they want to go. And I can get them free. And so what I'm listening for is what they want. Listening for is what they want. And so even more than, here's my card, here's what I do, it is more of a who is this person? And I mean, if it's in a professional conversation, is there a fit
Mm.
between what they're wanting and how I get people there?
How long does it take you to recognize what somebody truly wants?
Thing is that so many of us have it is unsafe to know what we want. And so the very first question we have to know
Mm.
in a friendship or certainly in a therapeutic context is what do you want? Yeah, what's not working? And
Mhm.
where do you want to be? And for some people, when they ask themselves that, they get a hand or a stop sign. Um, and so sometimes the work is reconnecting the inner conversation when they ask themselves what they want, that they can get a response. So sometimes it starts right there.
That's a really interesting way of framing it because I guess societally, from our parents, from the media, we've perhaps been told what we should want and what we should aim for. And yeah, not everybody breaks beyond that really. We sort of accept, right, go to school, get a job, and that's it. And I think, like I say, it is a brave question to ourselves in a way. What do I actually want? Because sometimes what we want isn't necessarily in line with the people that we've currently in a relationship, partnership, friendship, whatever, with.
That's right.
And is that so? Do you find when people come to you, they're ready to explore that question?
Yes, absolutely. Um, I get the bravest people that I've ever met. Um, and sometimes they have been raised with the ethos, really explore what you want, and
Yeah.
that's a value. But more often, as you said, we are told this is the standard for relationship. This is the standard for an acceptable or a good life. Do that. Don't ask questions. And then something stops working, and they start to look underneath the rug, and that's a very disconcerting process,
Mm.
but fruitful, but absolutely fruitful.
So what do you find are some of the most common myths, perhaps, that people sort of carry into long-term intimacy relationships that perhaps don't set them up for success?
I would name 3.
Mhm.
One, I would say, this is not my term, but I take it from Dean Spade, author, and it's a great title. It's called The Myth of Romance. And this idea is that romance, that your romantic, intimate, sexual partnerships are the most important relationships you'll have in your life. And you should ditch everything else in order to have those and focus on those. And that this will fulfill you and you'll be sexually compatible for the long term. And doesn't matter what you give up, this is the most important thing. And I'm not saying they're not important,
Mm.
but this myth that says you will be happy and fulfilled if you focus on this um, is yeah, sets us up for a lot of heartache. The second I would say is something called the relationship escalator. And again, that's not my term, but a journalist, Amy Garan, wrote a book about it. And it's an idea that there are an escalating set of steps that you go on to have a relationship be successful. And it looks a little different, from culture to culture or situation to situation, but generally you date. And then as you progress on the escalator, you get serious and you are sexually exclusive. And then perhaps you move in together. And then perhaps you collapse your social circles and you meet each other's families. And then perhaps you have children and maybe you start a business together. And the idea is that it goes along this escalating progression
Mm.
toward till death do you part. Maybe you get married, but it is a commitment. And so it is escalating toward a particular goal. Longevity is a high value, and uh, that this is supposed to make everybody happy. And I mean, it's impossible to tell statistics. I think some people it really fits. It's wonderful. We can probably find the couples in our lives for whom this is just it's just wonderful. It's really, really a beautiful example. For upwards of 80% of people, it is not. And so then we blame ourselves or we blame the other person when we don't actually question, was that escalator right for me? The third one I would say is that this affects everybody, but I think it affects female-bodied people, those who identify as women, more. And this is that you should give yourself to love. That love equals merging, right? Sometimes we hear, oh, that's my other half, my better half.
Mhm.
You complete me, right? There is a sense I am incomplete on my own, but with this person, I can be whole, and I should merge into them. And this is um, this is sold. There's a pretty big campaign, especially for girls and women. The happiest day of your life is when you get married. Um, that really this should be the focus, and you give everything. It's okay if you get selfless giving to this relationship is the definition of success. So then, when, if anybody inside the relationship, but say this woman, starts to feel like, where did I go? I don't know what I want. I don't know who I am. I feel dim and, feeling everybody else's feelings, but not my own. So what becomes a problem is, right, I feel like I'm losing myself inside this relationship, was the definition of success to begin with. And so this, I think, is very, really vital for us to take a look at. And it is it sits squarely inside a cultural view of hierarchy and of gendered roles. And that's not something everybody's ready to look at. But I am. Yeah.
It's really interesting when there's a couple of things you talked about there were about giving everything to the relationship, being fully committed, the relationship above all else, love above all else, whatever. But then it almost feels that to to then reach a point perhaps where ultimately things don't work out, it must feel like such a crash. Because I mean, you often see it in the media or in the films, whatever. I gave you everything. I gave you the best years of my life. I was fully committed. I was always there for you, and then it still doesn't work out. How do you? how do you almost start with people when they've lost so much of themselves in a relationship? How do you start to tease that back for them?
So it's such a beautiful question. Um, Let me start a little bit heady. This is not where I would start, but it didn't work out. It didn't work out. This idea we have that because it didn't last till death do we part, that it is a failure.
Yeah.
And I'm not pretending it wasn't hard or there are impossible logistical, spiritual, emotional things to sort through. But wish that we could not um, throw out the whole relationship, which probably had some really wonderful parts to it, because it didn't last forever. Longevity, just how long it lasts, is a I think it's a pretty lame measure of success, to be honest. You can stay together forever and be really miserable. People figure it out all the time. So I would question like, is it really a problem that it's not working out? With with full compassion for what I'll say next. I think it's really important to just stop and validate how awful it is to lose something that is to which we have given our whole selves, to which we have really taken our identities, who we are. Um, so you're not just dismantling a connection with somebody else, you're probably dismantling where you live, how the bills are paid,
Mhm.
what happens with children, who you are, who you know yourself to be, what do you think is possible. This is very, very layered. So, where I would start is just um, to not skip over that devastation. And no, we don't want to stay there. No, we don't want to be, pulled down and drown in it. But as individuals, as a culture, we are so afraid of that kind of acute pain. And we care about the other person. If we're supporting someone, we want to have them feel better, or we're just really uncomfortable with pain. And so we try to say, you're gonna be, you got this, you're gonna be great, plenty of fish in the sea, right? And that is all true, but not right now. Right now, we need to just be like, this is awful. This is really bad. You're not making it up. Let's dignify the fact that you feel like everything's falling apart. Let me hold your hand if that's okay, if that's appropriate. Let me bring you tea. Um, of course, of course it's hard. This is hard. And there is something in that without skipping over that hard, painful stuff that allows it to move infinitesimally and for the rest of the work to begin. And when we skip over that, as well-meaning as we are, sometimes we can dig in the pain even more unintentionally.
Mm.
Um, so there was another layer to your question that is like, okay, where do we start? It feels like it's all falling apart. This didn't work out. What do we do now? Um, it can really, really help to understand that there is an arc of transformation. There are phases to going through a deep dismantling into what's next. And
Mhm.
so I would reference the really beautiful work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross with her work with dying and those with loss. And what she did is she saw in working with people and their families that there were 5 stages that people would go through, and denial, anger, bargaining, etc. I'm sure we know those. And that is so sense making for someone. But, oh, I'm not in yet in the acceptance stage. I'm still in anger. Oh, here I am. I'm back in bargaining. And so my phases to this dark night journey, they're different, but they are very sense making. And so often when someone is going like, what do I do? It's all falling apart. I say, well, there's good news and bad news. You're probably in the dissolution phase where everything is really falling apart. And it is a phase. Um, there's some things that will help. And here's what the phase is for. Here's the medicine of this phase. Here's how to engage with it. And here's why it's an invitation rather than a punishment. And so we still have to go through the hard work and the inner work, but it's like we have a map of sorts. And I think this is deeply helpful.
It is it's very challenging that we still as a society see divorce as a failure, which is such a sad like because a marriage relationship, if it's not even a marriage, can bring incredible things. It can bring children, it can bring love, it can bring passion, and then there might be a time where it just isn't the right thing anymore, and then you move on to the next part of our life. But we do still see, certainly in the Western society, that divorce is gosh, it's a failure as opposed to that might have been a 10-year success.
That's right. And on that, right, if you think of the word divorce, almost the on the other side of the equal sign would be failure. Um, and yeah, and really not to negate how difficult it is. But I love what you just said. How dare us negate what could be, uh, until that point, a 10-year, 20-year success. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you distinguish in a relationship though between what might almost be a necessary dark night that can maybe lead to even deeper intimacy, and one where that really is the beginning of the end? How do you recognize? Because it might be quite subtle sometimes. Well, this is necessary, something to go through, and this is no, this is the end.
Yeah. Well, I think every that's I can't define it, right? Except for me in my relationship. But as a relationship coach,
Mm.
obviously that's something that each person needs to define for themselves.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that it sort of comes out in the process. So when I work with couples, there's maybe 3 phases or stages we go through, and the first is really understanding what is the, pattern that's been, creating the problems. And there's not maybe not it's not quite as simple as just one, but there's probably a main one.
Mhm.
And it's not an argument like who takes out the trash or who didn't take out the trash. Those are valid, but it's a deeper pattern, which is, um, how our unresolved parts are relating to each other. So in the second phase, we go, oh gosh, in that argument, you're not adults speaking to each other. You're, you're your wounds, you're your younger children's self, how you adapted to your own family situations. That's who's having the problem. So we not only need to understand what that dynamic is because it is very entrenched, and then we also need to do the individual work, which is how do we really support those wounded inner beings? And then, of course, there really are in a third phase, there's skills to how to communicate, how to, leave a triggered part or a younger part of us and come back to our adult part. And so I think in that process, we get a sense of how willing are these two people? How can the healing and the revelation outpace the deterioration in the relationship? And sometimes it really can. Sometimes it really can. And a real sense of of care and reconnection is reestablished or reaffirmed. And thank right then it is this deep trough we went through to deepen our intimacy and our care and our regard for ourselves and for each other. And with an individual, because if I'm working with an individual, much the same. Um, but I think I get more time to really work with that individual to get a sense. Can you hear yourself? If you ask yourself, what do you want? If you ask yourself, what do I need? If you ask yourself, what do I know in this situation? Not a logical answer, but a body intuitive answer. Do you get answers when you ask? And if not, um, if we right, so we really need to reestablish that self-trust.
Hmm.
Um, and again, if that can be established quicker than the deterioration in the relationship, um, then beautiful things can happen. I think it's a lot to ask.
Mm.
Complex human beings over multi decades, with how quickly lives change and how much we change as human beings, to stay, enough aligned to live in the same house and want the same things. And um, so I suppose as well, um, I just want to ease whenever possible a separation process that could be done. Maybe it's not
Hmm.
with that everybody is really besties after it, but it can be done without uh, talking through the children or keying the other person's car or getting revenge online or whatever we're doing. But a respectful process. Yeah, yeah.
Do you find that sometimes the challenge is perhaps at the beginning of the relationship? And what I mean by that is that we're often, rather, we're not really taught at school or from our parents often how to live ourselves, to create our own pleasure practice, to understand who we are as sexual and intimate beings in ourselves, and then we almost go into a relationship or marriage, like you say, almost that other person is going to complete me, or sort of they're going to bring all the answers to this. But if we go into it not loving ourselves in a way, that surely makes the outcome much. It's like you're putting the wrong ingredients together and expecting to get a beautiful cake. It's just not going to happen, is it?
I so love this question. I really think that we are, unless we take it in hand, from very young, actually, we're taught to separate from ourselves, to define ourselves by how we're perceived, by our accomplishments, uh, by having the right person on our arm. And we're like very disconnected from who we are and what we want or what brings us pleasure. And so reliant on someone else to bring that to us. I mean, I can't tell you how many clients that are mature, um, accomplished, self-assured women who carry around the belief, somewhat unconsciously, and there we bring it into consciousness, that my partner's pleasure is more important than mine. And I don't always think it's as easy as, oh, I missed a red flag way back in the beginning. And if I had seen that red flag, I wouldn't be here 10 years down the line. I think sometimes those things only come out when you have children or,
Mm.
as life progresses. Um, I, my, my desire and intention for relationships is pretty simple. It's like, could you be yourself? Could I be myself? And then we enjoy each other's company. Could we do that? Just that. Now, that is the work of a lifetime. But to your point, we are absolutely told, don't be yourself, buy this cream, or go to this gym to be a better version of yourself.
Yeah.
But God, oh, I wish, that we were just encouraged to really discover who it is that we are from the outset and bring that into relationship.
Mm. It's so hard, and I do think particularly for young women with the noise that the media creates and the expectation that you should look like this, but then don't behave like that. You should be doing this and not doing this. If you try to do everything that the media suggests you should do, your head would explode, really. And I do think social media in particular has created a lot more challenges with people having this almost expectation of how they should be as opposed to how they want to be. And yeah, I just wondered on your on. I mean, I talk about it a lot because I've got a 16-year-old son and a 19-year-old daughter, but both of them are wonderful, I think, and other people think as well. And I think, my goodness, how on earth are you navigating life? There was no social media when I was growing up. There were no smartphones when I was growing up. It was bad enough. It was magazines, it was pictures. That was all we ever had. Really. Whereas now, you open up your smartphone and you literally come in a whole world of pain. And I just wondered, yeah, how we help our young people to sort of navigate their way. That's a big question, sorry, but how do we help people navigate to who they should be themselves, rather than rather than what society said they should be.
Well, congratulations on your not so little ones. I have one son and he's 14. Um, and the tough thing is, right, especially in the teenage years, the developmental task is to separate from your
I
parents, to
know. Yeah,
individuate,
I
right?
don't like that.
Uh,
Yes.
right, to define yourself as separate, or just who am I? And the second developmental task is to connect with friends and be social. And I'm sure you have memories, right, of how quickly you listen to a friend and how much you did not listen to a
Yes.
parent, however well-meaning. Yes.
Yes.
Um, I say this with no hubris, right? With all the humbleness, because every child is so different. So in terms of how, so maybe I'd love to speak in terms of how we be with them.
Mhm.
What's our way of being with them, um, and then things to encourage them into. Um, I think if we really hold the value that we are curious about who they are, and that shows through in our questions, and that shows through in how we encourage them to explore things and make their own choices, they get the message that who they are and that their discovery of that is important. So we model that by what our intention, and then it comes out in the questions we ask, and the way that we are with them. Um, so I know every child is different. Mine does not. He's not a risk taker. Some kids really
Mhm.
fling themselves off the furniture, and and so he kind of was he's if you did that experiment with him, I think there's an experiment where you put two marshmallows in front of a
Mm.
kid and you say, if you can have one now, or if you wait, you can have two later.
Mhm.
He's the wait and have two later. So not all kids are like that. Um, but he really gets how devices and screens and social media are he just gets how he understands they're addictive. He understands um, how they can kind of bring you down a rabbit hole. Um, so I think that's great, right? Was sort of supporting them. I think the thing that maybe isn't the easiest thing to figure out, but it's really important, is so I worry a lot. I worry a lot about social media influencers, manosphere,
Mm.
online pornography, and some things that I have heard as I've researched those is that more than the ideology, when children, or especially young boys, go down those rabbit holes, more than the ideology, they might be kind of into the ideology. They're more interested in having friends. They're more interested in, like, here's a place where I've got community
Yeah.
and I've got buddies. So, how do we get in real time, in 3D reality, our kids to have good friendships, good circles of support? I don't think there's a lot of easy answers for that, but that feels very important to me. Yeah.
Mm. No, no, I totally agree. I think, ultimately, we all want to feel that we belong and we found our own tribes. And when you're a teenager, the smallest thing can feel like the biggest slight in the world. So that's what these social media manosphere type entities do so well, is that they create these communities and say, you're very welcome. We all believe like you do. You're right. Everybody else is wrong. And yeah, you get sort of sucked into it quite quickly. But I think the one thing we can and should do as parents, carers, friends, relatives, whatever, is talk. So many of my friends never talk to their kids about sex or their bodies or pornography or whatever. And not talking about it just makes it more and more dangerous, really. Just talking about something takes away the danger. I said to my son when he was quite young, I said, look, it's online pornography, it's out there, it exists, I can't do anything about that, but recognize what it is and what it isn't. It's entertainment for adults, it's not instructive, it's not educational, it's and he's happy to come and talk to me about it now, which I think is so valuable. Being able to talk about things really feels like the right thing to do.
100% agree. I do think that some of us think if you talk about something, it's more likely to happen. If you talk about suicide, if you talk about pornography, if you talk about when they might be ready to have sex, and it's absolutely the opposite.
Yeah.
That normalizing something that they know they can, this is an open conversation that you felt the same way when you were a kid.
Mm.
I think I'm so glad you mentioned this. 100% yes.
Mm. One thing I came to in life almost not too late, but later than I wish I had done is recognition that my it sounds so stupid now. Recognition that my body is talking to me as well as my mind. And I've been to sort of therapy before, and I sort of stopped going. So it really felt like they were fixing me from the neck up in a way. If they fix is the right term. But and I sort of ignored what my body was telling me. But when I sort of listened to my body, I could really feel sensations, feel tension, feel anxiety, always in my gut. I could give name to the shape, etc. And I wondered, when you talk to people, is some of it about helping them listen to their body, what their body's saying to them, and recognizing that you are body and soul. You're not just in your head.
Yes, this is maybe the main point of my first book,
Mhm.
Feminine Genius, which is mostly for women, but I had some wonderful men and non-binary people who told me, yes, it was also so helpful. Um, Thoughts, mind, brain, great, really great source of information. Um, but yes, we want to be connected into our bodies and what we are feeling. Um, because our bodies don't lie and our minds, our logic, like we can come up with all kinds of omissions and lies in our minds, but our bodies don't lie. They don't always speak exactly in words, but our bodies know when something is right for us and when something is wrong for us, when something brings tension and stress and
Mhm.
when it brings pleasure and relaxation. And most of us are very cut off from the neck down. So I think you're right. One of the first things I'm doing with people is reintroducing them to the way that their body communicates. And it communicates in sensation, hot, cold, contractive, expansive. It communicates in feelings, joy, dread, pleasure. It communicates in, we would call it intuition. And now that's going to be, each person I think would define what that is. Some people see pictures, some people get senses, sometimes there are smells.
Mhm.
Uh, but it's always a confirmation in the body. If you are getting an intuitive sense, even if you see a bird out there and you say, red cardinal, that means that my father, who's been passed away 20 years, he's coming in and saying hello to me. That is an intuitive knowing on my part, but how do I know? You might be like, oh, nice bird. But for me, it's an intuitive message. And how do I know that? There's a feeling confirmation in my body. Even though I saw something that was an intuitive message, the confirmation in my body was, yes, this is for me. And we can go through the exercise if you want. It's
Mhm.
fairly simple. That feels like the building blocks of reconnecting
Mhm.
to our body and our intuition. Should we do that? You want to,
I'd love
or
to. I'd love to.
yeah, and it's also a. I also have, if you link to it, it's called Know Your Own Voice,
Mhm.
and it's a short video and a little worksheet that goes with it. But we can go through it because we'll go through it a little quickly here. But here's what we do. Um, First of all, we just go, okay, in a minute, you're going to be asking yourself a series of questions, and you're not asking your mind, but you're asking your body. So you just get a little bit comfortable. And so you'll be asking some questions and then sensing for the answers and sensing in your body. And what that means, you could imagine if you were working with a doctor or a healer, and you came in for a pain in your abdomen, and the doctor or healer asked you to describe the pain. What did it feel like? And where is it? But you can't point to it.
Hmm.
And so you do your best, right? You'd sort of like see and sense inside, and you'd be like, well, it feels achy and sharp, I guess. Where is it? Oh, near my belly button, something like that. So that's exactly what we'll be doing. So the first part is to understand how your body says yes. And the second part is how your body says no. So what we'll do is ask you in a moment. We'll do this, and anyone who's listening or watching can do it along with us. So we will ask ourselves 3 questions. Now we already know that the answer to these questions is yes. There's no other answer than yes to these questions. So I'll prompt the question, and then what you do is sense inward. What do you sense, and where do you sense it? What feelings, what sensations, and where? So the first question is, do you love? And then you insert someone or something you love. So you already know the answer to this is yes. Yes, you love this person or this thing. So for example, I might say, okay, self, do you love your son? And I already know the answer is yes. So then you ask your version of that to yourself. And then we take a moment and just sense inward. What does that yes feel like? What are the sensations and feelings, emotions, and where do you feel it? Is it throughout your body? Is it more in one area over the other? Is it expansive, contractive, cool, warm, etc.? And then we'll just note those for ourselves, what we felt and where we felt it. And the second question is, um, do you enjoy? And then you fill in the blank. So it's something that brings you joy or pleasure. And this, what you fill in the blank with, you already know. Yes, this I love. This I enjoy. And so then each of us will sense inward, what do we feel and where do we feel it? And whatever you got, just note that as well. And the third is perhaps more subtle. Sometimes what you love or what brings you joy or pleasure. A little more obvious. This one's a little more subtle. So the question is my name? And then you insert your name. If you have a spiritual name or a name that feels more like you, use that one. What's ever more of a yes. And then you sense, what do you feel? What do you sense? And where do you feel it? And then we'll notice, what is the common denominator between what you felt and where you felt it? There is not a right answer. This is personal and individual. Um, I don't want to put you on the spot because sometimes you want to do this, at your own pace. Did you
Hmm.
get anything that you could share?
Yeah, for me, and interestingly, I sort of felt all the sensations in the upper half of my body, and all of them felt expansionary. So it was sort of my shoulders expanded, my jaw relaxed, I sort of felt bigger in a way, answering all the questions. So I'm guessing that when I ask a question of the body that could be a no, then my body's going to contract and feel the opposite. Is that how it works?
So again, I never want to say this
Yeah,
is
yeah.
how it works, right? But I will say that in a grand generalization of
Hmm.
doing this over years with people, yes, this is a very common thing that a yes feels expansive.
Mm.
And in a way, it makes sense,
Yeah,
right? What
yeah.
you're drawn toward. Um, Uh, but I also really loved what you described. This feels common to many, many people too, which is a kind of a expansion of you,
Mm,
kind of your you-ness is there. And maybe this is a little less specific, but when we're listening to our bodies, we're getting a yes, we like ourselves, right? There isn't self-doubt.
mm,
There isn't oh, what am I thinking? Or it's just like a utilitarian, obvious, like, yes, this is me, and I feel fine about that. um, so your answer is amazing. Like that was a lot to put you on the spot for, but are very common. And maybe you get the sense of what we would do with a no.
yeah.
And again, however, people feel this very differently, but often it is a closing in or a contraction or a kind of a lowering down as opposed to an expanding upward. Yeah.
Mm. Thank you.
So,
That's
oh,
it's like getting free therapy.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
No, I'll try that with my family when they get home and sort of see what they feel.
Yes.
So it feels like a very easy and lovely thing to talk about. It's not hard, is it? So how does it make you feel when you say, "Are you loved?" or "Do you feel this way? Do you love that person?" Yeah, I think that's it's really interesting. So one thing I did want to, well, many things I wanted to ask about, but I think, and you talked about it a little bit before about the relationship escalator, elevator, where we perhaps go into the relationship, we progress, we perhaps, let's say, start living together, we maybe get married, maybe don't, sort of, perhaps we're having, when we first get together, we're having sex all the time and it's amazing. It becomes less and less frequent because life, life gets in the way. And I wondered, I think one of the things that makes me sad, I think, is that a lot of people don't feel the ability to just sort of create a safe space to have a conversation about maybe what they want intimately and what perhaps they don't want, because our taste in food change over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So what we want in our intimate relationship, why wouldn't that change at the same frequency or more? And yeah, how do we sort of help or guide people to create that space where there's no judgment, it feels safe to sort of say this thing we've always done, I don't really enjoy it, or this thing we haven't done, I'd like to try. How do you sort of create that discussion space?
With a friend or more with a couple in a therapeutic situation?
Yeah, more with a couple, I think. Yeah, they sort of come to you feeling that there's something missing and doesn't feel quite as alive as the eroticism's gone, but both of them perhaps want something different than they did, but just don't know how to explore that conversation.
Absolutely. I really appreciate having and holding the role of someone who can say what maybe it's too hard to say or bring up,
Mm,
right? As somebody in the relationship. So for me to say, like, what to s- create the foundational understanding of I wish we had been told that over long-term committed multi-decade, multi-year relationships, it is not an if, it's a when. The sexual spark will change and will shift, and what you want as human beings will shift and will change. So you're right on time. Congratulations. Right? So for me to be able to normalize the situation and start the conversation, I think is really helpful. And it's partly why you might work with a coach or a therapist.
yeah.
Um, Sometimes it can, before we get into what's your fantasy or what doesn't work for you now or any of those things, I think it can be nice to um, understand the energy
Hmm.
of sexuality. And sometimes it's called eros or, erotic charge. And I don't mean to get too abstracted here. Um, but it is essentially a kind of aliveness. And on one end of the spectrum of aliveness, there is sexuality. But in a way, we are saying there's maybe a dip in our aliveness in our own selves and in our connection, and we want more aliveness.
Mhm.
We want more saying yes to life. And would it be okay if we talked about how to bring that into your sexual intimate connection? Um, and I feel like that's helpful. Uh, that's helpful because modern life and certainly long-term relationships, when something is the same all the time, we habituate to it. That's just that's what we do, no by no fault of our own. And so we have to go, how do we want this to be different? Um, Now, so that's where I would start. It really would depend, but you said this thing a couple questions back. You said something about having your own pleasure practice.
Mm.
And if you don't mind, would you share more about what you meant by that? Because it would, I think that's what I want to comment on.
Yeah, I
Of
think
having that.
I think it goes back to puberty. I think when we first have those feelings, urges to touch ourselves, to explore our bodies, and we because if as a young boy you have your hands down your trousers or whatever, a parent or whatever will slap your hand away, stop it, that's dirty. And then when we start to sort of masturbate, we do it very quickly, and we do it almost with a sort of chokehold as a man. Or the worst thing you can ever imagine is somebody coming into the room and finding us. Oh my god! So we do it quite quickly. So I think you often talk to people and they sort of say, "So have you ever spent an hour or two just exploring your own body, not even sexually, just knowing how does it feel when you strip the back of your hand? How does it feel when you touch your neck? How do things make you feel?" And then we go into a relationship not knowing that about ourselves, but almost expecting our partner somehow to have this magic intuition about where we want to be touched and how we want to be touched, where we want to be held, etc. And I think for a lot of people, having their own experience of pleasure and recognizing that they can pleasure themselves without the need for somebody else, always, it's a good thing and not something to be feel shame for or feel guilt for, or yeah, or that repression that we had perhaps when we were younger. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Absolutely. What Yes, and I don't know if we might have had some similar influences over the years, but one of the group of teachers that I worked with in the evening of day two of the workshop, weekend workshop, they had us go back to our rooms and do this exercise, which I've adopted and do with have individuals and do exactly as you're talking about. And they shared about what it was in the workshop, and they were like, "You're going to take a moment and really be with yourself and your body and see yourself with a very specific way, right? Not as with a judging lens,
Hmm.
not as a fault finding lens, but what with a appreciative lens. And then you're going to touch yourself in a very specific way that is exploratory, and with a guiding question, which is, how could this touch be more pleasurable than the last?" And then there was a phase where they said, you can self-pleasure, masturbate, touch. The idea is not to have a climax, but the idea is still to say, huh, how might this touch be more pleasurable than the last? And you can imagine how confronting that was to receive these instructions in a workshop. And we were sharing rooms, we had to say, okay, from this time to this time, you close the door, you go to dinner.
Yeah.
I appreciate my adventurous younger self. And in the middle of that exploration, I just, I think I started crying. And I realized I had never considered that my pleasure was for me. And of course, there was all this rich information of where I wanted to be, where I like to be touched, or how, or that kind of an expansion or a relaxation leads to an expansion of pleasure, all these things, but a reclaiming that, oh, this is mine. And it can absolutely be catalyzed and enhanced with somebody else, but I own this. Nobody else owns this. And so that was powerful and important. Um, I think as young as makes sense, I would want kids to have that. Um, you know, kids are not kids,
Yeah, yeah.
but sometimes, right? It depends when it feels appropriate for them. That some of their first experiences of aliveness, of erotic aliveness, could be in that reverential sphere, as opposed to questionable online porn or whatever.
Mm.
Um, so then I think that feels really important. I think it's also really nice to know not everybody knows this, but as a grand generalization, you're speaking about the quickness,
Mm.
right? Um, I think that all of us have been told to go quicker. You're right. The point is like as quickly as possible, get to
Yeah.
climax. And so I think not all of us even know that. um, whether it's preference or whether it's conditioning, the average man or body who has a penis will, reach climax in a few minutes. Um, but for the average woman or owner of a vagina and a vulva, that's more like 20 minutes before they're interested in penetration, or right. And so this is not a question of like, how do you make it through 20 minutes of foreplay, for example, um, but an understanding of like, oh gosh, we've sort of been conditioned to miss maybe the whole point, which is this relaxation into something that expands and expands and expands, where maybe a climax could be a nice thing, but incidental. Um, so I think that those things would open up a lot for people to then say, I would love to know what you would like more of. And I don't have to take that as that you're telling me I'm doing something wrong or haven't been doing enough, but with a curiosity of, oh, your self and body are changing. Is that interesting to me? If not, how can we support you to experience that in a way that works for everybody?
Mm.
Um, I think most, I think a grand majority um, of maybe sexual incompatibility is not like wrong position or technique, but it's a bit more of the our approach to our bodies and our approach to sexuality. And I think if we hang in there for a little bit, then the question of, do you want to try this kinky thing, or would you be okay if we try that? That is not a threat to ourselves or to the relationship.
Mm. Beautifully phrased, and I love the way you kept using the word pleasure, which I think that's one of the big things. I think we've perhaps been sort of taught that sex is generally penetration, penis in vagina. Yeah, typically, that's what sex is. And if you don't do that, you've not had sex. And I think if we could get back to thinking, well, what gives me, or how do I give pleasure? And that might be looking at somebody, holding hands, kissing, stroking, touching, whatever. It doesn't. But we seem to have this sort of um, orgasm centric, performative view of what sex is. And I think if we could, as you're saying, if we could bring it back to pleasure, that would feel far, far more comfortable, I think, than the pressure we put on ourselves to actually perform. We're not a circus. We've not been. told to perform really. But it's and especially as we get older, women go through perimenopause and menopause, men experience erectile dysfunction, and you get to a phase thinking, oh, you put so much pressure on yourself, will I get hard, will I stay hard for long enough? And then it puts you off trying anything at all, never mind it puts you off even kissing. So we lose the pleasure because we think we've got to have sex, otherwise it doesn't count.
Well, it's a little bit like the relationship, the myth of romance or the
Yeah,
relationship escalator, right? When we have
yeah.
this gold standard, we miss everything along the way, which was maybe where the real connection was and the real beauty and pleasure. Um, and in fact, one of the key things in the exercise I was talking about from that wild workshop was don't have an orgasm.
Mm.
I mean, if it happens, it's okay,
Yeah, yeah.
no demerits or anything. But what happens when you take that off the table, right? And I will do this often with couples to say, for this time, take it off the table.
Mm.
For this week, take it off the table. What happened? How present do you have to be, and what do you have to explore if that's not the goal anymore? And then a whole world opens up. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. See, it does. It's a bit like always eating the same meals and things, isn't it? If you sort of said, right, you can't have these 10 foods this week, then oh my goodness, you explore and you end up eating and tasting so many different things you never could have imagined possible. So if somebody says to you, right, just don't have penetrative sex for the week, or don't orgasm. You think, my goodness, you we are very imaginative creatures, and we can come up with some amazing ideas and things. So, but yeah, being given that opportunity, it feels really, really powerful. I really like that.
And maybe it invokes beginner's mind, which is,
Yeah.
a phrase from Buddhism. And I think this is probably one of the most important but hardest things in a long-term relationship. How do you approach this person that you've seen every day for 20 years now as a beginner with beginner's mind, which is seeing things fresh? Who are they today? How can I be curious? Um, and is there a whole world in the way that they hold my hand? And I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it's a beautiful meditative discipline. And that's what comes forward when we take away the habitual food or take away the habitual get to the climax.
Mm.
Yeah, really being present. There was never a moment like this before, and there's something precious about that.
So in all the work that you do, people come to you with challenges, often that things aren't necessarily how they want them to be. So and sometimes I'm sure people come to you with trauma and some very difficult situations. How do you protect and nourish your own well-being so that you don't carry the darkness from others with you?
Um, I've really actually had to learn this. Just to open the doors a little bit as a practitioner, it's very important for me that I have an emotional resonance with somebody. I need to be able to feel what they're feeling to understand how to help them out of trauma. But that's a little bit different as I've had to learn. It's different than taking it on. So I can't take on those feelings and pain and emotion. I don't get out that much because I need some time that is quiet and alone. I also have a kid, so if there's a moment where um, my maybe a poetic way of saying it is that as I'm working with people or responding to the world or being there for my kid, um, a little fragmenting. And so I
Mhm.
need some time to recall the little fragments of myself and bring them back inside my body and let them all sift down, I guess, which is a long winded way of saying some alone time. Um, I must have mindfulness practice. And sometimes that's seated meditation where I'm um, focusing on breath or body and letting my letting my mind know I'm not focusing on it at the moment. And sometimes that is a lot of times it's just being in being outside,
Yeah.
and moving my body. Sometimes it's stillness and sometimes it's movement. And that movement is very regulating for some of our nervous systems. Um, those are the things that strengthen my body, strengthen my psyche, so that I can be a very big container for some really big stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You've been super generous with your time and very patient with me. I did want to just ask one
Yes,
last question.
this is wonderful. Thank you.
And do you have a vision or a notion of what the future looks and feels like for you personally and professionally?
Thank you for the question. I'm thinking and pausing. Personally, right now, I
Hmm.
am at the threshold between being very happily singular. I'm not in a partnership, and I have very much needed that time to unravel some patterns that, of losing myself in relationships.
Yeah.
And that's been vital. Um, so that not having a partnership doesn't feel like a consolation prize. Like
Hmm.
for a while, you could give me a lot of money and I wouldn't get into back into a relationship. So it's been wonderful. Um, and I think that if there was a situation where I could be myself and the other person could be their selves and we could enjoy each other, I might be very interested. That's a possibility on my horizon now. Um, I would very much like to find my way to or create a version of living somewhat communally. Sometimes these are called co-housing, pocket neighborhoods,
Hmm.
sometimes intentional communities. I grew up and was raised on an intentional community where we had separate dwellings, but had a communal garden and shared meetings, etc. Um, and so that's very near and dear to my heart, nearly impossible to create in modern life, but nonetheless feels really exciting for me. And professionally, I'm so interested to see. I'm very focused on the second book that's coming out, and it comes out in October of 2026. My sense is that whenever I talk to anybody about it, they go, "Oh, that's what I'm going through. I'm so glad you're writing this." Or I really could have used this when I was going through my divorce. Um, but we'll see, right? It's not the thing that we talk about. We don't write about it, in our. But it's not front of mind when we talk about it. So I'll be interested to see how that comes forward, and I'm not sure that I love anything more professionally than someone who becomes themselves. And sometimes that process is through the dismantling and the excavation of a dark night and through a relationship
Mm.
rupture. But that seeing someone uh, spine get stronger and their feet planted on the earth and their essence shine out through their eyes and their pores and the deep unconditional positive regard they have for themselves is wondrous. And so I just want more to be on the team that helps create that. That's what I want more of.
It's fabulous. Well, I'm excited to see the book when it comes out. I'm sure it'll be a great success. But no, thank you so much for your time. You've been very generous with your knowledge and your warmth. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for this thoughtful conversation and what you're bringing through this, through you, and through these conversations. Thank you.